Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started in just a moment, if you can find your seats. I want to thank everybody for being here. My name is Dennis Strait. I'm an emeritus principal with the firm Multi-Studio here in Kansas City. For the last 8 years, we've been co-sponsors with the library for the Making a Great City series. And I want to thank, this is a great turnout, so I want to thank you all for coming tonight, for caring about your city, and specifically for caring about the topic we're going to talk about tonight. My job with this intro is to connect the dots between making a great city and this issue of homelessness. So we give you a quick introduction in that regard. The series has been going on, like I said, for 8 years. Tonight is our 20th installment. And the purpose of the series is to, Well, the purpose of the series is to help our community understand why we struggle in many ways. And the overview is to help us understand how our city functions from a fiscal perspective, the fiscal health of the city. And the thing that startles many people is to point out and kind of remind us that in the first 80 years, we went from a little village on the river to a full-fledged city, which had everything that you would want a city to have. And at that point, by 1940, we had brought together nearly 500,000 people sharing 60 square miles of Kansas City. And that's an important statement. We were sharing 60 square miles of a city. And that meant there were 7,400 of us helping to take care of every square mile of Kansas City, and it made a big difference. It allowed us to invest in significant public works improvements and to do good things across the board. Fast forward to today, and because of the way cities all around the country have grown, we've spread ourselves out. And spread ourselves out to a point where there are now, we're asking for fewer of us to help take care of a much larger city. So throughout the series, we've had guests come to town to help us understand why this is the case. Our leadoff speaker was Chuck Marone with the Strong Towns movement. He helped us understand that part of the reason we're in the situation we're in is that prior to 1950, when we built that amazing city in the first generation of our city, was because we were following the lessons learned, the intelligence of 5,000 years of city building. And so we built what was then a sustainable, vibrant, healthy city. But since then, we've been trying something new. And we've been building in a way that we're learning is not sustainable. So early on, we did a presentation that connected this to Kansas City by showing that this issue about how we've grown has created a situation where we at least have 4 times as much city per person to take care of than we used to back in the 1940s. That's part of the challenge. The other challenge is that we're continuing to grow in such a way that we're creating more of that unsustainable city and we're losing much of the vitality that made us the great city we were back in the mid-1900s. Even with all the growth that we've had, and the good news, so I want to make sure this is the good news discussion, is that since the 1990s, we've started growing again. Because from 1950 on, we were losing population. So from the 1990s on, we've been gaining population back, which is a great thing. We've still, until very recently, been losing population here in the central city. You can't be a great city if you're losing population in the part of the city that was designed for sharing and designed to be sustainable. So we told this story at the last presentation in November when we were celebrating this building and the role it played in the revitalization of downtown, because this is what our downtown was like 30 years ago, and this is what we all know today. So many of us have already forgotten what we came from in just 30 years. The point about that presentation is we're just getting started on rebuilding the central city and repopulating the central city. Another one of our presentations helped us understand that you can see the value in your city by the way that you measure it. And Joe Minicozzi with Urban 3 helped us see value by a color-coded heat map. And it shows the 25% of our city that's doing so well, it's actually putting extra money into the city coffers to help us do all the things we're trying to do as a city. But unfortunately, 75% or so of our city is in life support. and the balance is not healthy. We've got to get back to a better balance. So part of what we're focusing on this year with the Making a Great City series is how do you get back towards balance? How do you guide the growth of the city so that we can get back to a vital city that can do all the things that a city needs to do for its people? And one of the ways that we're recommending is that we really focus in on repopulating that part of our city that was built for sharing, that was built to be sustainable, because that's what's going to help us balance the books and get back into a sustainable mode going forward in the years ahead. It's not just going to happen because I'm sitting here talking about it. This is going to take a change in momentum, because the momentum is still going out like it's been for the last 80 years. We need to start bringing ourselves back together, which is a willful act that is not a they, the government issue, but a we, the people issue that we need to embrace. And Mandy's going to be talking about that same subject here in just a minute, about how we need to take on the issues that we're facing if we want to continue to try and become a great city. And while we're doing that, we also need to focus on how we can be a great city throughout the metro. It's just harder to do that, but the most important thing is to start to rebuild that part of the city that made us vital to begin with. So we'll be talking as we go forward about strategies to regain the 250,000 people, intentional pause, 250,000 people we've lost in the central city over the last 80 years. We need to rebuild that back, and starting now. So last year we focused on housing, and our speakers helped us understand that a fundamental reason why we had the homelessness problem is because we failed to continue to build the housing stock that we need to serve our people. And we've also helped to understand that it's just rebuilding neighborhoods. We don't need to do public housing projects. We need just housing of all types, built in ways that anybody that needs to can find a place to live where they need to live and make a life for themselves. So that brings us up to today's discussion, because you can't do the things that you need to do as a great city if you don't have the resources. So making a great city involves doing the things, making decisions, being informed, and guiding the growth of your city in such a way that you can afford to take care of everybody that is trying to make a life for themselves in your city. And that's why we're talking about this issue tonight. Tonight, Mandy's going to give us some insights into how we can deal with the issues we're facing from a homelessness perspective in the near term. The Making a Great City is all about how do we create a sustainable, long-lasting solution to that problem, which we'll be talking about further as we get into the series over the rest of the year. So with that, I'm going to introduce Beth Hill, who's the Community Resources Manager for the library, and she's going to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Dennis. First, let me say, give a big thank you to Nancy Phelps with J.E. Dunn, who's helped to make this evening possible. Now, very quickly, I want to tell you just a shade about what we do here at the library, but also why I am so incredibly excited to be here tonight and to be introducing Mandy Chapman Semple. First of all, as a community resource manager, I am a social worker. I work inside the library. I am responsible for, and our team is responsible for, the services for the 10 branches across the city. On any given month, we see between 400 and 700, we have 400 to 700 interactions a month. Most of those people are unhoused. I've been here 5 years. It's been going on way before that, but that's what we're seeing now. And part of the reason I am so incredibly excited to have Mandy here is because in 2010, I was an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer. And my job was working with Goodwill at the Workforce Partnership in Kansas City, Kansas. And during that time, Kansas City, Missouri decided to put together a homelessness task force. Well, I wanted to be on that task force. And I found out that they needed a representative from Platte County. and I was from Platte County. So I said, what do I have to do to be on that task force? And they told me, and I did the whatever, and I was in. And so we worked on that. And what we developed was this plan, 2010. Yes, I have nothing else to say about it. In 2022, the city came up with an idea to have the Zero KC plan to end homelessness. Guess what? I'm on that one too. We are in year 3 of a 5-year plan. What do you know about it? Yeah. We have to do something different. And so I am so excited to have Mandy because she's been doing something different. And we're gonna hear about that. So put your hands together. Mandy Chapman Semple is coming to talk. Thank you.
Well, I hope I live up to that. It's really wonderful to be here. There's so much energy in this room. I'm so excited, and I hope I can match your energy and give you a different perspective. And I want to do that by being able to tell my story to you a little bit. And I think through that exercise, we're going to be able to walk out of this room hopefully thinking a little bit differently, carrying this energy right into action, which is the most important part of all of this. So, believe it or not, I have a lot of history with this part of the country. I lived in Kansas. You're going to hear more about that today. I spent a lot of time in college here in Kansas City, hanging out. So it's really wonderful to be back. I really adore this part of the country. And part of, I think what I adore about it is that it just has so much sensibility. It can look at problems, it can see people, it can come together as a community, and it can make incredible things happen. And I feel like that's in my DNA. This is where this is the part of the country that I'm from. And so I love coming back and saying, I took that DNA and I went someplace else, and I was afforded this incredible opportunity to do really cool things, and now we're trying to do it everywhere. And it feels right that it should happen here, right? Because there's an origin, right? This part of the country is a part of me and a part of that story. I also know that I come to you at a time of challenge on this issue in particular, but on so many issues. I know your community, like everyone, is struggling with this immense challenge. It's not new, it's not a new challenge, but it's certainly taking on new dimensions. It's becoming more political, it's feeling a little more hopeless. And I need to tell you that I ride that roller coaster. I had the opportunity to do something incredible in Houston. I know that it can be done, but I'm still on that same roller coaster because this kind of stuff is hard. And you can feel really frustrated, and you can feel really hopeless. And I want to invite you today to take a step back from those feelings and not let those constraints of the current conditions kind of hold you back in the conversation. I want to invite you to let curiosity be your guide, to be open to these ideas. I might say things that are hard to hear or that you disagree with, and that's okay, right? The opportunity is for us to figure this out together. And I will tell you, the story of Houston is not that everyone came to consensus. It wasn't that, right? What we came to was a complete commitment to the issue itself and to the willingness to work together to figure it out even when we didn't all agree. So what that meant is we agreed to disagree and we tried. And if it didn't work, we tried the next thing and the next thing until we found out what did. And you're going to hear more about that as I go through this, but I hope that you can come to this today with that kind of curiosity, right? And that kind of hopefulness. And then we'll check in at the end and see how you're feeling. So let those frustrations go and let me share my story. We'll go from there. So believe it or not, my story on what is really an unintentional career in homelessness response started in this little old shelter for men, women, and families in Manhattan, Kansas. I was an undergrad at K-State studying microbiology. I went on and got a degree in microbiology, and I still kept working at this emergency shelter. They were hiring people to sleep overnight and do homework and hang out with people, and they paid you. And that seemed like a really good gig. And it turned out to be one of the most incredible experiences of my life. And it was also one of the most frustrating experiences of my life, because here's the reality. I wasn't a policymaker then. I wasn't a system designer, right? I had no history in social work, that's for sure. I'm not a social worker. I was just a student looking for this part-time job. But what I had was a deep passion for wanting to fix things. And I kind of had a scientific brain, right? And so I was like, this experiment is not working. That's what it felt like. And what was even harder was to see the brokenness of our approach, but to grapple with the reality that it wasn't because people weren't doing good, righteous, helpful things for other human beings. There is not a person who's doing homelessness response work today that isn't doing good work. The problem is all of that good work, all of that hard work just wasn't producing the results we needed. And that's a really hard place to be. Because how do you tell people that what they're doing isn't right, isn't good enough? It's not a good place to start, right? That was really hard. I was young, so I didn't, and I was not in a leadership role at the time, so I didn't have to tell anybody that. I just got to feel it, right? I got to see it, and I got to feel it, and I got to observe. And what I came away with was this complete unwillingness to accept that that was as good as it gets. I just couldn't. And so I took that dissatisfaction, and I let that carry me to a different place. And where I let it carry me to was this idea that we needed to reimagine everything in this work. And that's really how I came to this place of reimagining homelessness response. What I've since learned is that across the country, and this probably is going to sound very familiar to you here as well, our homeless response systems are growing in size, right? But not in success. And that is hard on everybody. We're building more shelter beds, we're increasing outreach, we're expanding our services, but the number of people exiting homelessness is not growing. It's flat at best, right? And what's even worse is unsheltered homelessness is growing. And so how do we reconcile this notion of good, righteous, helpful work with a kind of collective failure like that? It's really hard. It means it means more people are coming into homelessness every year and fewer people are leaving. It means we have a growing number of people who are long stayers in our homelessness response system, people who are literally stuck in a cycle of homelessness that they cannot escape. We grow in our backlog, and then we feel incredibly hopeless as a community. And the pressure mounts. And then we end up spending more to manage homelessness than really to end it. And I want to tell you, Houston was in that exact spot when I started in 2010 in Houston in that work. So at the time, Houston had more people living outside than they had living in shelter on any given night. Over 4,500 people sleeping on the streets on any given night. What was interesting is that the city probably didn't see it and feel it in the same way that they feel the 1,000 that are still there, because it looked and felt different, right? There were more places to hide. Our downtown hadn't gone through its revitalization and its development. Our downtown hadn't invited new residents back into its community yet. And so folks were relatively hidden, but they were there. What that meant at the time is I had a little bit more of a runway, right? But it didn't change the reality that what we were doing was not working. And we needed to change the trajectory. And so that opened up some hard truths that we had to face. And so I have a bit of a crude animated slide here, forgive me, but I've experimented with jazzier ways of doing this, but I think we'll just cut right to it, okay? So here's what I learned, is that ultimately our instinct when we're experiencing, right, a crisis in our community, when we see individuals in crisis, our instinct is this idea of we need a big funnel to catch all of these people who are in crisis, right? And this is rooted in the way we respond to other kinds of disasters, right? I live in Houston. We have a hurricane. We set up a disaster shelter, right? Folks flow through that disaster shelter. FEMA's helping people move along, right? And then it closes, right? Disaster solved, right? So our instincts are rooted in something really, like, honest, right? So here's the problem, is that disaster is a one-time event. Homelessness has annual inflow. New individuals every year are flowing into homelessness. So if our instinct and all we do, right, is grow our funnel, guess what happens? Our long-term stayers grow because we're not getting more people out, right? We just made a bigger funnel. We didn't increase the volume by which people could move out of that funnel. And the annual inflow just keeps coming. So when I finally was able to figure this out, I was like, okay, so what do we do? Because this just creates pressure to continue to invest in expanding the funnel. And then we grow the funnel, and then the funnel overflows, and then we grow a bigger funnel. And I liken it to, the emergency room, the waiting room in the emergency room is overflowing, and instead of adding more doctors, we build a new emergency room, right? Doesn't make sense. None of us would be satisfied with that if we were sitting in that emergency room, right? Which is also why people leave it to go sleep outside. Makes sense, right? Why would I stay in the emergency room if a doctor's never coming? If there's no exit in sight. You're like, I'm gonna self-determine, I'm gonna go figure stuff out for myself, and I guess the tent is where it is. That's not the social contract, right, that we want in our community, but there's a hard truth in that we had to face. So what do we do? I had to figure out, what do we do to respond to that? Here's what you do. We have to invert the funnel. That if we are able to do that, and we're able to start helping people avoid entry, right? So we shrink the number of people that need to come in, it gives us the resources to actually grow the funnel in an inverted way. Guess what happens? Long-term stayers shrink. Eventually they're eliminated, and then you can recalibrate that system. This is what is called functional zero. I think that term gets thrown around a lot, and it's really difficult to know what it means, but this is what it means. It means we have a system where the number of people flowing in will flow out. I call it system equilibrium. That's what we're striving toward, right? Is this idea that everyone who is going to experience homelessness that year is going to get out and not get stuck. And so once I was able to figure this out, it then became a design issue. How do I design a system that can function like this? Which meant I couldn't be stuck in the design that we had. Had to move past that, had to think differently. So once I learned that we needed to invert the funnel, I then had to figure out how we actually do it. And this is what I came up with, is instead of building an emergency response system, what if we built an emergency rehousing system? What if the idea is that someone experiencing homelessness, no matter who they are, no matter what created those conditions, what if we accepted that they all need to be in housing? So think about this. We accept everyone should be in shelter, right? And what do we do in shelter? we wrap services around those individuals. We're like, come into the emergency shelter, we'll put tons of services around you. And then we hope that you'll be able to leave one day. And we hope that everything's gonna be okay for you. And then when you run into crisis, where do you go back to? The emergency shelter. That is not an inverted funnel. No. And it really wasn't serving the individual's needs long-term. It wasn't serving the community's needs long-term, right? At the end of the day, what we really needed is I needed individuals who were vulnerable to experiencing homelessness to have a safety net around them as they went back into their housing. And so what if I took all of the energy and resource that I was putting into creating this crisis response, and instead we said, let's just accept that everyone needs to get back to housing, and then we're gonna wrap those services around them there. We're gonna create this safety net within the context of a rehousing system. And not everybody needs the same safety net. Some people just, they need a little springboard, right, a little help. And other people need just lifelong wraparound supports. And if I can understand the spectrum, right, of need, and I can calibrate that based on the data, then we can take our resources and we can stretch them across that spectrum. We can build the comprehensive system that we need. We can invert that funnel and open it up, right? Both to help people avoid coming in and to come out quickly and to provide the spectrum of service and need that those individuals need. So that's the concept of building that emergency rehousing system. This wasn't a pilot project. It was a new logic, a new way of thinking. And everyone always asks me, like, you know, what did Houston do? And very practically, they did all the things every other community is doing. They sheltered, they supported, they navigated, they rehoused. But they did it with a new logic in mind. They rearranged the order in the way that they did those things. They re-examined where they were investing their resources and moved them toward the creation of an emergency rehousing system. And so what ultimately happened is that it allowed us to take the annual resources that are made available and build a baseline, right? Build a foundation of a system. And then every time there was any additional resource, we could grab it and rehouse more people. So guess what? Hurricane Harvey came along in Houston. We had this emergency rehousing system in place. Guess who called us to rehouse everyone out of the disaster shelter? FEMA and HUD. Wow. It was incredible though, because what it meant was the opportunity to grow our emergency rehousing system's capacity using other resources. And at a time when Houston should have seen a huge increase in homelessness as a result of a major disaster that displaced lots of people, we didn't. And in fact, we experimented, because of this way of thinking, we actually experimented with all sorts of cool new ways to rehouse people. And it shaped and has continued to shape the design of the system itself in Houston. So the story of Houston isn't, some one, magical innovation. It was the ability to embrace this new way of thinking and to hold it at the center, right? In every decision. In everything we did, this became the most important part of our strategy. It doesn't mean that we had everything we needed all at once, right? But we could grab at everything and start to build it because we knew exactly where we needed to get to. We knew where we were going. So at the end of the day, this new logic was not about managing the need around homelessness, right? It was about reducing it. It was about making it rare. It was about making it brief. It was about making it non-recurring. And our homeless response systems, our communities throw these words around in their plans, and they're important words, and I'm not telling you we don't mean them. We all mean them. But what Houston is doing is really putting that in action. It's really building a system to get that done. Continuing to just move people into an emergency shelter and expecting something magical to happen, expecting something to be different all of a sudden, isn't really honoring that commitment, right? Or sitting on our hands and saying, well, we don't have enough housing. When I was in the mayor's office, if a homeless response system had come to me and said, yeah, we really want to solve the problem, but There's just not enough housing to do it. They're not inviting me into their solution, right? What they're basically saying is, you're gonna have to figure it out because we can't. And oftentimes you do not want mayor's offices figuring out the solutions to your problems. Right? Right. We want to inform those solutions. So I had a mayor that gave me an incredible opportunity to get to define that. And then we've gifted every mayor in Houston since an emergency rehousing system that they only got to build on, that they only got to leverage, that they only got to grow and move. And we don't even have to reshape it, right? We can define its next iteration under their leadership, through their eyes, right? Through their lens. And it can become a part of their legacy because it's become an institutional part of the community itself. I'll tell you, in Dallas, they've been following Houston's lead for some time now, but they're doing so at a much more accelerated pace because they don't have to figure it out, right? They can follow, this thinking and this playbook to some extent. And one of the things that they're on the cusp of doing, which I think is incredible, is getting the entire downtown community to rally behind this idea that if they're going to invest in public safety, which is really law enforcement in downtown, that's an annual obligation, right? And we all accept that. We're like, city budget needs to have policing in it, but they're equally demanding that there needs to be resources for the emergency rehousing system on an annual basis, because those two things are actually, right, the two sides of the coin. It's incredible. Fingers crossed it works. But just the fact that we've been able to come to that place where there's a recognition of these things being intertwined, and it's the leaders of the downtown businesses that are the ones carrying that charge forward. It's an example of the local problem is the local problem, and we have to come together to fix it. And we're leveraging every federal dollar. I was just on the phone earlier with the leader of the Dallas system. She's in DC right now meeting with the HUD secretary. She's like, I'm learning everything we can. We're gonna leverage everything we can, but we're still making the solution local, and we're still rallying our local community to be the center of gravity on the issue, right? They learned that from Houston. What Houston has taught us is this idea of embracing collective impact. And it's a little tricky because collective impact in 2010 was a cool buzzword. We did lots of collective impact stuff, which basically meant we made like big boards of people that used to come together and hang out, right? Yeah. Great, not necessarily, that's the precursor to doing something as a collective, but collective impact comes when you actually achieve the impact itself, right? So here are the things that Houston did. Houston reduced homelessness by 60% in 4 years overall. Overall homelessness, 70% reduction in unsheltered homelessness. It has held that and continued to chip away at it. Even during COVID, an additional 30% reduction in unsheltered homelessness. And I'll tell you how in just a little bit. But it was applying that thinking, grabbing at those resources, right? Each and every time. But it was possible because the community unified around this vision. The public and private sectors came together. So and I've said it, and I'll say it again, we leveraged every resource. We invited HUD to the table, right? We invited the state to the table. They don't necessarily come, but we do try to invite them. This became a really important piece of this because every decision was made under a shared vision. Right? How do each of us contribute what we have? How do we meet our individual bottom lines through the shared vision that's available here? It can get clunky sometimes. My job is to keep reminding them that, they all don't need to go to their corners. Like every bottom line can be met when we get people off the streets. I can't imagine a bottom line that isn't met. So we just have to keep reminding folks of that. Here's the other thing that can be really difficult, is that we accepted soft power and actively managed. One of the hardest things is that everyone's like, no one's in charge of homelessness. I'm not in control. Yep. So it's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of different systems and leaders and sectors and people who have control. But that doesn't mean we don't have power. It just means we have soft power. But when we come together and we unify around a vision, and when we bring those leaders to the table, what we're really asking in that unity is that they wield their individual hard power to drive alignment toward our shared vision. So I worked in the mayor's office. It was a strong mayor system. Houston put in no general revenue for homelessness response. That is still true. I had no hard power, right? But I had a lot of soft power. And my job was to show up in those rooms and to rally everyone together and to accept the responsibility to go and wield that soft power to move all of the parts to meet our shared interests and to actually create impact. Because impact is how we clear the runway. Like, people only show up for so long to talk about impact. You gotta start doing it, right? So there's another side to this. We embraced intentionality and standardization. This can be really hard in the nonprofit sector because we are all very conditioned to be unique and special, so we compete against each other for funding. Sound familiar? It's really problematic because what we're trying to do is build a system that we need to be sustained. We need predictability in our funding. We need to scale this system, right? And our funding structures keep forcing us to try to reinvent some singular solution, right, that can be contained within one organization. And that's really problematic because then we're fixated on the wrong things. We're trying to hold everyone accountable in the wrong ways. Like, it takes a village to solve this problem. There's no single organization that can get it done, but every organization has a role to play in getting it done. So we need to be intentional, and we need to standardize the way we do business so we can create predictability, both for the individual organizations, so that we can create accountability for performance, but gosh darn it, more importantly, for the people who are experiencing homelessness. I mean, the maze that we put people through. This organization does it one way, this organization does another. This, you know, and listen, I think individual autonomy at a nonprofit provider level is so important. Everybody has their flavor, right? They have their culture, they have the way they do business, but we can come together and agree on some standard practices that are going to ensure that everyone moves through this system in a really productive and effective way. And what that meant is, when we did that, when we brought everyone together, we started conditioning everyone to systems thinking. So what that means is we use feedback loops. And we adjust in real time. If it's not working on Monday, then we adjust on Tuesday. Or maybe 7 days later. We'll give it 7 days. But we're not waiting a year to do an evaluation to see how that thing went. We're not piloting, never piloting, because oftentimes there's no intent to scale a pilot, right? Our intent is to scale this response system, so we test. We're testing. Did it work? Yes. Go bigger. Does it work when we go bigger? Do we need to make an adjustment? Yes, go bigger. No, adjust, right? And we do it together in real time. That's systems thinking, right? And then what it really means is we actually gave people permission to fail. But we said fail forward and fail fast so we can figure this out together. Keep it moving, right? And we housed someone every day as we were figuring it out. So we never really failed. It's just like, you know, oh, that assessment we didn't, you know, get us there as fast as we wanted. But we still made it happen. We muscled our way to the other side. And that's really important. This is maybe one of the most important parts. Maybe the secret sauce is we didn't wait for ideal conditions. Like, I did not wait for there to be enough affordable housing. We'd still be waiting, right? Yeah. We let our constraints become the drivers of innovation. Not enough shelter beds? Yeah, maybe we can just skip it. Maybe we can go direct to housing. Not because I'm passing judgment on shelter, but if I have to invest in a two-step process versus a one-step process, one step gets you there faster. Let's try it, let's figure it out. And that, we back into how much we might need of the two-step, right? Not to say that we don't ever. Not enough housing subsidies, kind of already previewed this, right? We reimagined how we could stretch our resources across the spectrum of subsidies. And then we grabbed it, all sorts of one-time money, which normally the nonprofit sector is super afraid of, right? Because you can't sustain it. But if you plan for it, if you're intentional, you can grab one-time money, you can grow capacity, this is what businesses do all the time, right? We can apply those same principles in building these kinds of systems. Not enough housing units? Guess what? We have a tremendous amount of buying power in the market. Do you realize that? Think about how many housing subsidies the system already has available to it. Do you think you have 1,000 subsidies at any given time? You probably do in this city. Over 10 years, did you know that's more than $100 million in buying power? Do you know what we do with it? We hand it out in paper to one individual at a time and say, yeah, go make that work in the rental market. So all we did is we said, wait, let's concentrate our buying power. Let's get into the rental market and negotiate a business deal. Let's get access to what exists today so we can solve the problem today while we're supporting the development, right, and the expansion of affordable housing. But we don't need to wait to solve homelessness. We don't need to try to, contort ourselves in order to become developers. We'll never scale that quickly. But I can take our buying power and get into the market. I can make us use those resources really effectively. And you want to know what's wild? Is the housing authority who holds the largest amount of that buying power, they don't use it that way either. So they always have leftover vouchers. And so when you're an emergency rehousing system, guess what happens at the end of the year? They're like, hey, we have some more vouchers. Can you use them really quickly? And we're like, yeah, we'll get 100 people housed in 24 days, whatever you need, because we have a system built to do it, right? Grab that one-time money. So it's just about thinking differently. We started to see encampments growing in Houston, even after. I'm sure anyone who's been around for a long time can appreciate there's really been an evolution in unsheltered homelessness in our society, right? It used to be a much more hidden type of homelessness, and now it's become a very highly visible type of homelessness. Lots of reasons for all of those things. Houston has gone through that same experience despite dramatic reductions in unsheltered homelessness. What was really tough is that when that happened, it made it look like all of our progress was for naught, even though the numbers were still way down, right? And we were still chipping away at it. But now all of a sudden people are like, it's worse than ever. These are hard things to navigate against. They're hard things to manage. But what we had to do was apply our same kind of logic, right? We had to meet that moment by finding a way to continue to rehouse individuals and to innovate and to let those constraints, right, not constrain us, but empower us. And so we said, great, we'll go encampment by encampment and we'll rehouse everyone. And then we'll close that encampment after we do that. So first encampment, rehouse everyone, now closed. And we'll maintain closure at that geography so we can go to the next encampment and rehouse everyone. 128 encampments later in Houston, and a 30% reduction in unsheltered homelessness during the period of COVID when everyone else saw increases. It's just applying that thinking, leveraging those resources, right? That's all one-time money. But during that period of COVID with that one-time money, Houston housed over 18,000 people. It's the fourth largest city in the country. Just don't let the scale scare you. The principles are the same, right? Wherever we are. Every time the system basically said we can't, we said, what if this is our opportunity to design something better? That's really the magic of Houston. So by now you realize that whether we were given permission or not, we pushed boundaries, right? But we changed the narrative. We made everyone believe that it was possible. Even if it wasn't happening all at once, everywhere all at once, or, or overnight. And what we asked for was permission to experiment and to learn. And we communicated that. We communicated what we were learning, even when it was hard, even when I'm not going to say we failed, because I don't feel like any lesson is a failure, right? As a scientist, like in my background, do you know how many science experiments actually come up with like a positive result? Like hardly any. It's like a eureka moment, right? In this work, in this sector, I mean, we rarely fail. We learn, we innovate, we move, right? But we almost always succeed in the experiment. It's just that we're finding ways to do it better. It's a really incredible opportunity to work like that, right? When you can get the entire community into that mindset. We celebrated increments. This is really important because politically, this is a hard issue to win on, right? I've shared with you that even Houston today still struggles to win on this issue. Luckily, the rest of the country thinks they're really winning. But if you go to Houston, there are people who are like, we still got homelessness. And we're like, we do. And we're working on it, right? So my job at the very beginning, think about it. I had a mayor, and she was like, I'm going to take this on. When we did this, Houston had political terms that were 2 years long. You could get 3 2-year terms. So that meant a mayor was running for re-election every other year. And the mayor that I came in under in 2012, at the beginning of her second term, said, I'm going to take on this issue for my community, for my city. She was a really incredible visionary in that regard, even though she knew she wasn't likely to get the immediate political win. Luckily, we found each other, and I was like, you will get the political win that you need because you are granting us an opportunity. You are clearing the runway for us to go really hard and fast, and we're going to do it because this is rare, and we're going to prove it up. But what it meant is I delivered to her every single week a set of talking points that said, and now this is how many people we've housed, and this is how many people we housed. That's how Houston gets on the cover of the New York Times when they, saying we've housed over 25,000 people. We started that from day one, week one, and we just built on that number. And the key was I could continue to clear the runway. I could sell, as long as I could show every week we were housing more and more people, right? I had to move, celebrate the increment in a really smart way. I've talked lots about seizing opportunities. It's really been a critical part of the mindset. And then just some of that simple, honest, active communication. Sometimes, we're not real jazzy sometimes in Houston. We don't have real glossy stuff, but it's pretty straightforward and we keep it pretty simple. At the end of the day, our collective impact is about housing as many people as quickly as possible and helping them avoid returning to homelessness. Period, end of story. Those are the things we measure. Everything else, I kind of say is like diagnostics, right? Yeah, those are our vital signs. Okay, so now you know we have a new formula. Big impacts in Houston. I've talked to you a little bit about Dallas, but I'm so proud to say that communities across the country have really been working to implement this model because they have a playbook. It doesn't mean it's so formulaic, right, that you just drop it into a community. It's a way of thinking, remember. So it's about adapting based on the current conditions of that community. And it's about using that way of thinking to innovate and to move that city. Oklahoma City is a really great example of a community that I think you all can relate to a little bit. And this is a community that had an unsheltered homeless problem that just was very steady, right? They just couldn't figure out how to make, it was just really steady. But what we noticed in the data is that each year, the percentage of chronically homeless individuals, the percentage of long stayers experiencing unsheltered homelessness was growing. And we said, listen, we gotta go tackle that. Let's just go do it. And they put together, a $13 million initiative to go and respond to 500 individuals sleeping in encampments over a 2-year period in that city. And they're gonna end this year, that initial initiative, but they just announced a 43% reduction in chronic unsheltered homelessness. Wow. It's exciting. Doesn't mean the problem is solved, because guess what we figured out? Our unsheltered count overall really hasn't moved very much. Guess what that tells us? We have a design problem. Because basically, the way their shelter system functions in that community is that there's only overnight shelter, you have to leave in the morning, and then you go hang out outside all day long, waiting for things to happen. So guess what? If you're new to homelessness, guess where your waiting room is? It's outside, or the library. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Nobody did that intentionally, right? Everybody's doing their thing. But when we apply this kind of thinking and we start to see it, then we can start to move the parts around. And I love Oklahoma City as an example because it helps us appreciate that it can't happen all at once. Like, we have to figure out where to start, and we have to start to move. And we can see progress. And they just had an incredible press conference where the overall point in time count went up, right? For lots of reasons. But this targeted work is moving the needle. They are reducing the number of long stays, which is how they're going to get to system equilibrium, right? And now they're investing in front-end diversion and rapid exit and rapid resolution to shrink their inflow. So, we figure out the right order. So I'm not going to tell you that Houston is prescribing the exact way of doing anything. In each community, we come in and say, the prescription is to figure out how to reorder it for your community to make it work. Dallas was a great example of a community that, kind of found itself willing to go through extraordinary transformation during COVID. It seized these one-time ARPA funds. It decided to rehouse 2,700 individuals in 2 years. Previously, it rehoused 200 people a year. It had no muscles built, right? No emergency rehousing system. But what they committed to was this audacious goal of saying, we have one-time resources and we're going to use it to build this system, and we're going to muscle our way to it. And now they have that system built, and I told you, they've convinced the community it's the way forward, and they're talking about how do we sustain the funding for this big, beautiful emergency rehousing system? How do we expand it? Just this month, they will close downtown in Dallas to sleeping because they've rehoused all of those individuals. They've changed the way they manage the streets within downtown. They changed the way services are delivered. It doesn't mean they've solved homelessness everywhere else, but they're working incrementally to get it done. It's really cool stuff. New Orleans, I don't know if you guys follow the news, but sometimes the story of New Orleans can be a little tricky. It hosted a Super Bowl recently. Did you hear about that? Yeah, and a Taylor Swift concert before that. And but long before that, the city council got together and said, we're gonna tackle unsheltered homelessness in this community, but we're gonna do it right. And they had huge encampments in the inner core of New Orleans. You'd experience that. And they applied a very targeted approach. We're gonna go move individuals out of those encampments into housing, we're gonna support them in housing, and we're gonna close behind us. And they did that and got almost all the way there before the Super Bowl. And then there was some political stuff that happened. But guess what? We're all the way back to, after 3 months and $17 million later, the governor investing in a temporary shelter during Super Bowl for 200 people, $17 million. I just want to put this into perspective. We're back to now closing the inner core in New Orleans to sleeping because we've rehoused everyone, right? They're on the verge of that. Super cool. Denver has an interesting story in that the mayor, on his very first day, came in and declared a state of emergency, 9 a.m., first day, and his commitment was to get 1,000 people in 6 months off the streets. This is a good example of a mayor that was committed to housing, but just really didn't understand that he didn't have an emergency rehousing system built. So what they ended up having to invest in is a lot of non-congregate shelter, and it's very expensive, right? But what's very cool is they did it, and they built the trust, they built public trust, they cleared a little bit of runway to say, see, we can disrupt, we can do things differently. And then they got to work to build those rehousing muscles, and they're moving, instead of closing those non-congregate shelters because they're too expensive, now they're investing in rehousing individuals out of those environments and beginning to close them and shifting those resources, right, into rehousing. Because if I can invest in 5 exits for every 1 shelter bed, I can serve 5 people a year in that bed. So the fastest way to expand our shelter capacity is to invest in our exit capacity. It's really hard to hold that, but it's really true, right? Cleveland's a cool story because they had 150 people sleeping outside. It's cool because they felt paralyzed. I think it's so important to hear this. They felt paralyzed. They felt like those people could never come off the streets. And they were investing in tons of outreach and all sorts, and there was huge resistance to this idea of like pushing to rehouse these individuals. They'd also decided to convert their shelters to non-congregate shelter. People were living in shelter for like 4 years. It has one of the most affordable housing markets in the country. It's just they were so stuck in their way of doing business. And so they had a really cool mayor, a cool individual that came in and said, we got to do things differently. And so we started with those 150 people because everyone could agree that we should get those folks off the streets. And so we did, despite protest of the outreach workers, despite everyone's insistence that this was never going to work, they went and rehoused 154 people ahead of schedule and basically have nearly eliminated unsheltered homelessness in their community. And guess what? Now the shelters are like, we want some of that. And now they're equally as interested in building those rehousing muscles. And I'm like, how about we start with the people who've been in there for 4 years? Like, we gotta get people going, right? It's a cool story because it's proof that such a small pivot in your thinking can make such a huge difference. It's also proof that a resistance to that pivot can absolutely hold a community and the people who are suffering hostage within it. And that's the part that's hard for me. That's where I struggle to sleep at night, is when our own sector is resisting this idea of moving people off the streets as quickly as possible and into housing and supporting them, right? It's hard work. I'll be the first to say it's hard, but we can come together and support each other to get that done, right? That's how I feel. Okay. So here we are. I feel like we've come full circle. You know my story now. I'm passionate about this work. So wherever I go, and I work in cities all across the country, what I'm always doing is asking myself, what could this city do with their approach? What's the small pivot this community can make to start to make a big difference, to start to feel hope again, to start to believe that something can be different, to get our policymakers and our funders reinvigorated, right, to invest in these resources. Interestingly enough, I've not met a single city manager that isn't interested in being a partner on this. Everyone's desperate for solutions, and it's just about how our homeless response sector can show up and inform those solutions and be legitimate partners in all of this. So here's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping I can leave you with my little formula, like how I do this work. And I always ask myself 3 questions whenever I need to make a decision. Do people get housed? People get housed, it's probably a pretty good decision. Are we maximizing our resources to house people? That one can be a harder one to figure it out. And does it meet the moment? Here's the reality, is that homeless response systems, the idea that rehousing people is new is not fair. Homeless response systems are rehousing people. They're just doing ways that are pretty quiet, right? And not really at volume or at scale. And so the problem is that when we don't meet the moment, when I don't have a way to show everyone, then none of that rehousing exists in people's perception, right? The only thing that exists is the crisis in front of us. So part of the shift, part of the pivot, and part of why meeting the moment is so important, and sometimes it can be so hard because people are like, I don't want to give in to the politics or the this or the that. And I'm like, are you kidding? I want their money. If I can get them invested in the solution and all I have to do is go house these people instead of these people, guess what? We're already housing these people instead of these people. We don't have enough right now. And if I want to get to a place of abundance, then that's the formula. Imagine if the opportunity in Houston, right, had presented itself all a long time ago. And we just sat around and argued about who should go first. We would not be at over 30,000 people housed, right? Because it doesn't matter to some extent who goes first, as long as we intend to get to everybody, and as long as we go fast. Because people suffer, people die, our community suffers, right? So that for me is the most important way of thinking, right? Is to hold those things true. So here's my question. Kansas City has everything it needs. You have courage, you have capacity, you have commitment. But I recently read an article in one of your newspapers where there was a lot of frustration expressed, right? And I opened with, yeah, that frustration is real. We have to own it. We have to be honest about it. This article expressed concern that this city has the resources and capacity, but maybe not the commitment to solve this problem. And my systems thinking experience tells me that that's often actually not the case. That what you might have more likely is a design problem and a leadership problem. You don't have a commitment problem, right? And that the thing that I think is so important, and maybe where I differ with the author of that particular article, is I think it's only by coming together that you're going to solve this issue. Right? To blame individuals who are experiencing homelessness for their homelessness, or to blame the service providers for this crisis, it's not going to get us to the solution, right? At the end of the day, we all need each other. It takes a village. Our systems design will dictate the incentives. When we're incentivized to compete, we compete. When we're incentivized to work together, we work together. That's where collective impact is really powerful, right? But you can't give it lip service. You have to actually make the adjustments, the structural adjustments that make that possible. So change your design, you can change your incentives, and you can change the accountability for performance. That's my counterpoint to the article. And I hope something you guys can carry forward, right, using this formula. So I'll say it again. I think Kansas City has everything it needs. You have capacity, you have courage, you have commitment. So I'm going to ask you, how will you change the game? Thank you.
Mandy, that was inspirational, really. If you have questions, we have about 10 minutes. Please use the microphone to the front so the people watching at home can hear the question as well as the answer. And I'm going to start it off with a question from somebody watching at home, which was, these solutions are great. How might they work alongside other large-scale federal programs like a universal health care or a universal basic income? How might that be have some synergy with these types of local solutions?
Yeah, I mean, any of those types of programs would be incredible, right? Anytime we can create subsidy, we can do anything to change the economic kind of conditions for individuals who are vulnerable to housing instability. You know, we're going to have some effect, but it doesn't necessarily completely change some of the kind of fundamental design principles I was describing. You still have to build an emergency rehousing system for those folks who fall out, but man, when we start to find opportunities to partner or leverage with those other systems, it's how we can stretch those resources. So even in the state of Texas, where we haven't expanded Medicaid, we're figuring out how to fully leverage Medicaid. And we received in Dallas one of the first in the nation HUD waivers that allowed us to start cost sharing with our state Medicaid structure for the service delivery model. So what it meant is, instead of HUD covering the full freight for our intensive behavioral health and case management services, we got to start cost sharing with the behavioral health sector. There's lots, I mean, I think it's just an example that when you start to think about this in the context of a system and not individual programs, you have buying power, you have negotiating power. You can think about scale entirely differently. So It's a really great question and an exciting vision, and I think in all of these things, are incredibly synergistic and open up new, innovative opportunities to move forward.
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation. How do you deal with, the messaging? Because housing in a Protestant, capitalistic, individualistic country like ours, the housing is a symbol of individual accomplishment, of virtue, of raising yourself up by your bootstraps. So when you talk about housing being some kind of consistent, people I think in America feel like they need temporary, and that's what they buy in, and then you get on your feet, and then you should pull yourself up. How do you get people to buy in the sense that some people need consistent support? Do you understand what I mean about the Protestant work ethic thing that people will always go back to? A simple solution. If I can just get this person into church for 52 weeks, that they will somehow realize that they are capable and that they will find a job. You know what I'm meaning?
I totally know what you mean.
The message.
Well, so first, usually it's easier to go to church if you have some place to live, right? So that's really important. But I think that your question is really important, and there's so many layers under all of this. I'm a data nerd, and so what I can tell you, when I'm building these kinds of systems, we go right to the data, and that data helps us define that spectrum that I was just describing, and ultimately, right along that spectrum of individuals flowing into homelessness on an annual basis, maybe 3 to 5% need intensive, long-term supports if we would catch them early. Right? In this process, almost everybody else just needs some version of a temporary intervention. Usually about 80% hardly need anything, right? But most of our systems aren't designed to actually even be responsive to that. And part of it is because we have so many long stayers who now are stuck in our system, and the longer you're in our system, the more complex your needs become, the more intensive, and we're digging ourselves out of that hole still, right? So part of when we do that modeling exercise is really putting some data to that and starting to cast a vision for individuals that's also rooted in a cost basis, right? Like, you're absolutely right. We shouldn't be paying for this, but we've deferred our investment for a really long time. And the way people pulled themselves up by their bootstraps is they went and slept in that tent over there, and you're not liking that. So we should probably invest in a different solution with the resources that we have. And so usually you can bring people to that place. Like, at the end of the day, I think the common bottom line is that nobody thinks somebody sleeping outside is a good thing, right? It's not good for them. It's not, they want to use the park. They want healthy communities. Like, I just think that's a really good place to start. And then the more I think we can bring data to the table, the more we can be honest and factual about some of those pieces. You can't convince everyone, but I think on the whole, my experience is, people just want to know that somebody's doing something, that somebody knows what's happening, that they're doing something, and that they can believe that progress is going to happen. And that's where, all of managing that narrative and delivering on the increments. The number of times I was in the mayor's office, right? I'm the one who received all the angry calls, all of them. And the number of times I went to the community meeting, and it started with everyone yelling at me. And then I was like, let me tell you what we're doing. And by the end, they were like, well, how do we get some of that in our neighborhood? And I'm like, yeah, let's get some of that in your neighborhood, right? Like, I think most people come along when we can bring the solution to the table, right? And what we can't say is, oh, there's not enough housing, because we're not inviting partnership. Yeah. Yes, sir.
How do you work with landlords, property managers, particularly with the voucher system, and they will turn down a voucher because there's a certain stigma attached to it, and so a lot of those vouchers end up going back to the government, and we communities lose those vouchers for people that could basically use them.
It's a huge problem. You're absolutely right. So here's how we tackled this. And I alluded to it, where we were like, we amassed our buying power, but literally, here's how we did it. We assembled a pool of flexible resources. Oftentimes, this is where private resources can be used quite nicely. and we created a dedicated landlord engagement team. So basically, we stopped handing a voucher to a client in crisis. We stopped handing that voucher to their social worker and expecting that they were gonna go figure out how to convince a landlord to do them a favor to make something happen. Like, that wasn't a scalable solution. So what we did is we hired people who were former property managers or who were real estate brokers or like people, and we said, here's a pool of resources, go negotiate a business deal in the market. And when you're willing to pay for things, it's amazing what people are willing to do. So we are like, we'll pay to hold your unit, and then we'll pay you like a hold fee, and then if you turn the unit really fast, like pass inspection for the voucher, then we'll pay you another incentive, and we'll start first month's rent so you can keep all of that money. Who will say no? We just buy our way into the market. We outcompete, and what we're doing is we're giving people an advantage that have no chance of getting into this market whatsoever. And what's nice is then we can start to negotiate. And landlords love us because then they have someone to yell at, right? So now we have a dedicated team of people that they get to call up and be mad at. But let me tell you, the reason they like us so much is they're mad all the time about everyone in their building. So the stigma that's attached to individuals that carry a voucher, it's just an unfortunate stigma. The reality is, like, I learned this from the individual who runs Camden Properties, big, fancy apartments across the country. He's from Houston. He was a part of this work in Houston, and he would say to me all the time when we would compare notes on like turnover rates within apartment complexes and things like that, and he's like, your turnover rates are way lower than our turnover rates. He's like, and this perception that, you know, all of the tenants in these high-end units are like wonderful, glorious tenants. He's like, none of that's true. Like, it's all the same problems. So, I mean, when we could just cut through some of that and just get down to the economics of it, on the whole, we do fine, even in tight housing markets. And then we start to get super creative where we're like, can we master lease whole buildings? Can we do all sorts of things with our buying power? I could go on and on and on, sorry.
Mandy, let's do these two questions, and then I want to finish up with two more with people watching at home, and we'll wrap it there.
Okay.
Patrick McLaughlin, he, they, thank you for your time tonight. Just about what you were just talking about, are you leveraging private funds to be able to do all of that, or are you able to convince HUD or whoever needs to be convinced to use those permanent supportive housing dollars to do what you're just now talking about?
Okay. I really love HUD in that we started with private dollars to do the incentives that I'm describing, just the incentives. And then HUD was like, that's a really great idea. We'll get in on the action. And I'm like, and the reason I say that is because it really becomes problematic. Like, sometimes we're holding units that we never end up using. And so when you have public dollars in the mix there, it gets a little messy sometimes because public money has to be associated with a use, right? So this is where I like the mix of private funds to give us some of the flexibility and the nimbleness that the public dollars don't, but then we still can layer in the public resources for various things like move-in kits. We want to move, if you want a good tenant, you got to move them in with some basic stuff, right? Like cleaning supplies so they can clean, you know, just things like that. So we do move-in kits and some basic furniture kits. And the federal government has gotten better about being willing, or at least historically, to invest in some of those resources. For me, I would always prefer to maximize the federal or public resources for the rental assistance because it's much harder to ask a private funder to cover rental assistance. That feels very, very scary. Much easier to be like, can you keep our flex fund going? And, you know, these are, you know, they don't feel as obligated to an individual. So some of this is just the creativity and how you braid the resources within the collective impact structure.
So I feel like my question could be an entirely different talk, but so you talked a lot about aligning existing service providers to the model and getting the systems thinking implemented across providers. And how did you inspire that when it's at odds with sort of the visceral human experience of like, it feels really good to throw a sandwich out the side of a van and then go home and feel good about yourself, which is the model for a lot of homeless services in this city?
Yeah, fair question. Grappling with this in every city. Here's the answer. I don't try to convince everybody all at once. Like any good initiative, we start with our early adopters and we bring those individuals along, right? And then you're gonna get to some of those folks that you have to work at. And And here's the lesson that I've learned. There's a political lesson in this, there's a social lesson, there's all sorts of lessons, is that trying to go convince people who are doing good charitable things to stop doing good charitable things, there's regularly a win in that. So I would prefer to just eliminate the need. If there's no one to feed, then you stay in the suburbs and you do something else, right? So that becomes the objective. Two more.
Two questions. I want to say first though, I am never more proud to be a Kansas Citian than when I hear how great the questions are at library events. Thank you all for that. That's amazing. Okay, what communities have you seen animosity toward when you're trying to rehouse them? Is the problem partially an underlying animosity towards people of color, members of the LGBTQ community, and addicts?
It's a great question. You know, it's interesting. So when you're asking about, you know, does anybody say like, oh, I don't want to rehouse people? I don't ask them that question. Because the truth is I'm not there to convince them of the worthiness of any of these individuals, right? I'm there to say, this is the solution. If you want this problem to go away, here's what we need to invest in, and I'll deliver for you. And it kind of cuts it out of the equation a little bit. And I think that this is a really important kind of point to make in all of this. And this is oftentimes what I have to try to educate communities on, is advocacy is really important. But this idea that we try to infuse advocacy then into the negotiation and delivery of our work at the expense of the very individuals we're trying to advocate for, that is harmful. And we have got to figure out how to separate those pieces apart a little bit and advocate here for the right, you know, ways and values in which we want to deliver in our community, while also meeting the very basic of needs for individuals, even under less than ideal conditions, which is why it's not a value question, right? It's a very practical question about what's right for our community and how should we invest in our community to have kind of the maximum level of health, right, and possibility within that community. So that's how I navigate that. That may not feel right for everyone, but I'm here to solve what's broken more than I am to try to convince everyone to think exactly the same way.
Last question. Kansas City spans 3 different counties that are politically very, very different from one another. How unique is that? And do you have any suggestions for dealing with that sort of an issue?
Yeah, I would say that's actually pretty common in most of our cities, right? The urban core tends to have a very different kind of political bent than the suburban, right? The outlying suburban communities. But the reality is that the way our, you know, for better or worse, at least, you know, for now, the way our federal investments, right, are structured is it spreads the resources out across all of those. And if we want to amass those resources to respond to our urban problem, we have to bring some of those others, right, outliers or outlying communities into the mix with us. Again, for me, it comes back to, I think we all share a bottom line, because those individuals in those outlying communities want to come in and enjoy the urban core. They want to, you know, have the fun experience. They want to feel safe. Right? This is why this like concept in Dallas of a campaign to say like, we want downtown to feel safe. And part of feeling safe is that people have a very like legitimate place to live, right? Because we have a rehousing system that ensures that we catch individuals and they don't end up languishing on the streets of downtown, right? In ways that are scary for everyone. So I just think if we keep coming back to that notion of what we want as a community and we keep applying these design principles, that's how we get there. Everyone seems to come to the table. I will tell you, we always want to cost share, but urban cores are oftentimes just always going to bear, right, the larger responsibility in that. And if we can pull those communities in to offer some contribution because they believe, right, in the community that we're trying to build, that's a win-win for everyone.
Thank you, Mandy. This was great. I think you have a room full of people ready to get out there and go to work.
Perfect.